This is the Elemental Educator, the podcast where we kindle the fires of dialogue with the alchemists of education. We're here to embark on a journey where ancient wisdom meets the contemporary world of education. On Elemental Educator, we dive into the deep waters of adaptability, feel the grounding earth of core values, ride the swift winds of change, and ignite the fiery spirit of risk-taking. Fire, earth, wind, water. This is the Elemental Educator. And now your host, Tyler Como.
Welcome to another episode of Elemental Educator podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Kurtis, a seasoned educator and leader whose journey through the educational landscape of Alberta has been both inspiring and transformative. Kurtis, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there, Tyler. Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so let's dive right in. How did you get to where you are now?
That is a story that could take the entire podcast, but I'll try and keep it to a minimum. I started my teaching career in mid-90s and was up in northern Alberta and moved into a leadership role quite early on. I think I was a year and a half in, and they were looking at some aspiring leader programs within the division and looking at their next wave of leaders, and saw something that I didn't necessarily see in myself at that point, but jumped in quick, moved into min roles, principal roles. Then after 9 years, moved down into southern Alberta in administration roles, began some work that has led to this collaborative response work that I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to discuss. From there, taught at the post-secondary level for a little bit, and it's led me to this point now where I have the pleasure and awesome opportunity to work with school jurisdictions across Alberta, Canada, beyond, helping to implement really effective collaborative structures to support the needs of students. So that was as quick as I could throw that educational journey. But yeah, it's been 27 years and I'm still excited by the learning and continuing to try and grow as an educator.
Thank you for sharing. I went to the U of L. I never crossed paths with you when you were a teacher there.
Yeah.
Would you have worked with Danny Balderson?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was on faculty at the same time. I was faculty from, I think it was 2010 to 2000 as a secondment first, and then brought in after that as lecturer. Yeah, I knew Danny well.
That's awesome. Danny, when I did my ed degree, I think that's why we never crossed paths, because I started in 2016 there. Okay. But Danny was the phys ed specialist, and then Carrie Burness taught the outdoor education. This was the wildest guy I ever met. We went to Alfred Lake for a week and came out with all these certifications. And then him and I bonded, and we actually went on a buffalo hunt together couple months later up into the Northwest Territories. Yeah, it was awesome. We had a great time. He's a wonderful person.
It's fascinating, all the connections that you start to make when you engage in these conversations with people.
Yeah, a very small world. So I know that you shared what your journey was, but why did that journey start?
I think that I grew up in a rural farming community and engaged in 4-H, and through 4-H had the opportunity to engage in summer camps and counseling, and realized I really liked being around kids. Like I loved leading that learning at a very basic level through those camp experiences, and reached the point of I would just like to be able to make a difference for kids and a difference in lives. And that's what drew me into the education world to begin with. And actually, it's still what fuels the work I do now, is just how can we make an impact for students and for learning and impact lives that I hope we're able to do through continued work.
I know we didn't really talk about the earth element in the pre-survey that you filled out with me, but we just shed light on your earth element here and how it's rooted in wanting to support and help others. Very close and very true to a lot of the great leaders and educators that I've actually talked to on previous episodes here.
Yeah.
When we have that root and just wanting to bring experiences for other people, it's such a powerful thing.
It absolutely is. And when you're really focused in on trying to make a difference, it fuels the reflective part of our practice of, am I making a difference? What could I be doing differently? What could I be learning that would help others? And what can I learn from others, most importantly, that I think is so critically important for not just our profession, but for the human experience.
Now, you wrote a little quote for me when I asked you about embracing wind when faced with adversity. You wrote ready, fire, aim philosophy.
Yeah.
Do you want to break down that for me?
Yeah. So I first became acquainted with it through examining the work primarily of Michael Fullan and how he's really been influential in his writings, thinking about how we create transformative organizations and lead change. And he had coined it from a couple of individuals, Peters and Waterman, back in the 80s, I think it was. But this idea of a ready, fire, aim philosophy is rooted in the idea that we ready ourselves through conversations, through initial planning, but that we don't get caught in that planning trap, that idea of ready, aim. We're not quite ready to start this until we do some more aiming. And I believe that you learn by firing. We put something in place, we try, and we learn through the process. That there's many things within my life that I engage in where I don't have it all figured out, but I'll fire and learn along the way. And part of that learning is going to be making mistakes and being okay with that. But I think that's really key for embracing change. And that wind element is knowing that you'll learn through the process and there's going to be implementation dips. That's inevitable. And being okay with that you'll make a mistake and you'll learn and then take your next step forward, and not getting trapped as so many of us get trapped in that. It's got to be perfect before we start. And no, it doesn't. We just have to start. We fire, which is so critically important.
And yeah, you're not the first person that I've heard say this before, ready, fire, aim. And the first time I heard it, I actually laughed about it because I said, it's ready, aim, fire. But I took on Elemental Educator and I broke down the elements. The definition of fire here, it's the same as ready, fire, aim. Take the risk and then see where it goes and root yourself in the earth on why you took that shot right away. And know that if it's rooted into that value of desiring to impact kids, it's going to land somewhere that's okay. And if it doesn't, it's going to land somewhere that can be adjusted and fixed. But you took that first shot. You took that first step.
I would imagine too, Tyler, that your understanding of what those elements mean to you now is different than it was even a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I imagine
for sure.
It's become much more deeper, and what you thought you understood, say even 2 years ago, is not where you are now. It's through that firing process that you learn and deepen understanding.
And the way that I view it is our elements are within us. And so your earth is within you, your water is within you, your air is within you. But fire is the one thing that's actually external from you as well and can be a light for your other elements and a source for your other elements. And you're not going to tap into your other elements holistically until you expose yourself to the fire.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember from day one, I was rooted in wanting to make a difference, wanting to make an impact. But I was so scared to play with fire because I wanted a continuing contract. I wanted to succeed. I didn't want to lose a job or end up in jail or sued or did something horribly wrong. So I didn't play with fire. And now I'm starting to branch out a bit. There's a bit more confidence on it. I don't have the continuing administrator contract yet, but we're doing incredible things because we're not afraid to play with the fire. We're ready, fire, and then aim after. That's where that's coming from.
Yeah, and that it's an ongoing process. It's a learning process is what it is, really.
Along your journey, there was a shift where you got into Jigsaw Learning.
Yeah.
And your earth would have been very rooted in that desire to make an impact. How did you handle the shift in career though?
Again, by firing. It was not a planned progression. So it was through my last administrative role in an elementary school in southern Alberta where we were putting structures and systems in place that started to evolve and look different than some of the contemporary learnings at the time around professional learning communities. And there was literature emerging around this response to intervention thing at the time, and trying to encapsulate and build all of that into a really coherent system. It just naturally led to people starting to reach out and ask to, how are you doing this within your school? What does it look like? Requests started to come in to share it out with others. And so I would do that. And in order to share out, we'd have to give it language, give it names, and put a framework around it. So we referred to it as collaborative response. And when I reached a point at that school where it was time for the next voice to come in and to lead, and I was ready for the next challenge and had moved into teaching at the post-secondary level, this work, just the requests kept coming in. And so it was at a point where it was on the side of the desk, and you'd be explaining, you'd be presenting at a conference, maybe a school might ask if you could come in. And when I worked at the post-secondary level, I had a lot more time and opportunity to meet some of those requests that were coming. And then it just snowballed. I couldn't keep up and reached a point of, the thing I'm doing on the side is actually taking over the job I'm being employed for. So I need to make a decision. And at that time, it was, I really enjoy working with these schools and now school jurisdictions that were starting to take some interest, and made that leap into moving into a consulting role with no safety net. There was no pension that came with that. There was no health and benefits. And Jigsaw Learning was born at that point. And I have really enjoyed being able to learn and engage with jurisdictions across the province and beyond through this work, which, like I said, the genesis of Jigsaw Learning and the work we do around collaborative response was not a planned endeavor. It emerged.
And I'll get to collaborative response in a sec. That, again, all I think of when you're telling that story is ready, fire, aim. 100%. And we're coming back to that standpoint. And it was rooted in your earth of wanting to do better for kids and give opportunity, and recognizing that to do that, sometimes we have to work with the adults too to do better for the kids. Absolutely. And to do better for everyone. Now,
it's interesting you say that,
go ahead,
Tyler, because I don't think I recognized it at the time, but it's been through reflection where when I first moved into administration, there was that aspiration of, in my classroom, I can make a difference for these 25 students that I have this year. But in administration, I could make an impact for potentially hundreds. And then when I moved into post-secondary, it was with the intention that if I could help make an impact for teachers entering the profession, that could have a cascading effect that could impact thousands potentially through that work, if I can have some meaningful impact there. And then through this collaborative response work and working with jurisdictions, it has the potential to impact many more students and organizations, which again, just continues. It's the part I get excited about, of knowing that if I can do this work and engage and make an impact for systems, that's going to have huge impact on the number of students that can be reached. It's the classroom. It's still a classroom. It's just a much, much bigger classroom now.
That's a really good way to put it. And there was somebody that I interviewed before this where they actually said, I got into teaching because the teacher before me, who probably got into it because the teacher before them. 100%. We talk about impact size, and the reason I'm pursuing administration and elemental educator and wanting to do all of these things is impact size. I want to make the biggest impact I can for the betterment of the growth of our society and where we're at. But even as a classroom teacher, you don't realize how big that impact can be, because if you inspire one teacher, now their pedagogy has been influenced by you, who they are now passing on to a generation. Yeah. And if they inspire a teacher, you're actually second, third, fourth hand connection to these kids. You have no clue how far down the line you've actually influenced someone to be a teacher. And that was a crazy, mind-blowing thought. That was the first time it was shared with me. And I thought, you know what, you're right. Because I'm young in my career. I think my first grad class was 2 years ago. Yeah. But if any of them became And now they're going to inspire kids who become teachers, who inspire kids that become teachers. That's because of my impact as well. And recognizing that it might not be the big mass scale of working with everybody that's specifically becoming teachers, but there is that opportunity to lead no matter what education role you're in. I get ahead of myself though. I really want to come back to this risk and progression step you took.
Mhm.
Ready, fire, aim had to have been met with some resistance by people that are aiming and aiming and aiming. How did you, in those interactions, break that barrier for them and show them that it's okay to fire before your aim is set?
Yeah, I think there's a few things to that, Tyler, and fantastic question. I think one is being able to model. And that is something that was shared with me early on in my career of don't expect something that you're not willing to do yourself. So being able to model, and then more importantly, showing vulnerability that when we fire, I'm going to make mistakes through that process. We are going to make mistakes, and that's okay. We'll learn through that. It doesn't mean that if we and we want to, of course, there's a reason why ready goes before the fire. We're going to think about what are the risks, and we're going to mitigate some of the big ones that we definitely do not want to step into. But I think being able to be vulnerable and share, here's a place where I misstepped, and how I'm course correcting or calibrating to be able to share. I think that becomes really valuable from a leadership perspective of basically going first and modeling that vulnerable, and then creating the psychological safety within our teams so that when we take risks and they don't go as planned, it's the opportunity to reflect on why. Why do you think that happened? What would we do differently if we were to do that again? And engaging in that collective reflective process that just helps us continue to learn and to step forward. But yeah, I think when you come to someone who I don't want to start until we know the plan is perfect, being able to understand that even if you think the plan is perfect, when we implement, there's going to be things that are unforeseen that, of course, we're going to come up against. And then what's our plan when we hit those barriers, or we talk about in change theory, the idea of implementation dips? They are going to happen. What's our plan for when we hit an inevitable dip that will come, and how will we see ourselves through that?
Absolutely. And you're alluding to, as long as you have your good root, your good earth, and your good foundation, you'll navigate that and you'll find your plan. You just have to keep aligned, right? And that's why it's so important and it's so undermined by people to have that mission, that vision, that values.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to set that guiding principle, because if you're not able to, people don't know where to take the change when they're faced with it, and they don't know what to do when things need to change because there's no alignment. But you did mention the idea of getting there a little bit through collaborative
Right.
responses. And what is collaborative responses, and how is that different from traditional models of student support in schools?
Yeah. So again, the early genesis of this was about the mid 2000s. I was a principal of that elementary school in southern Alberta. It was in Claresholm. And I came into this school blessed with great staff members doing good things for kids. This was not the school that needed fixing in any way, or that there anything was broken. This was a good place to be. But it was readily apparent that we didn't have necessarily systems or structures for us to work effectively together. And what was really clear about that is we had centuries of teaching expertise in that building when you put together everybody's collective um, knowledge and wisdom. But sometimes the expertise that was at the end of this hallway, I wasn't accessing because my classroom was at this end of the hallway. And we refer back to now through reflection that we really had isolated islands of excellence, good people doing good things, but how could we effectively leverage that expertise to best support students? And through that, we had students slipping through the cracks, and it wasn't through lack of anyone's competence or will to be able to do what it was for kids. It was structures. We were missing structures to help guide our work. So response emerged or came to be as a framework where we would have really intentional, there's really three puzzle pieces that we talk about in the visual for collaborative response. Is how do we establish really clear and intentional layers of collaboration within our school? So that's our first foundational component. Second is how do we utilize data and evidence to inform those conversations, to flag which students we should be paying attention to, and then in time to have evidence of what are we doing that's having impact and how do we know? And then that third foundational component of developing continuums of support that clearly articulate what are the practices that we will employ when we're responding to the needs of students, and making that clear and understood within our school. So simple in design, highly complex in actualization. But this emerged from that early genesis of that school of how could we leverage the expertise in a way that's going to impact more students and, more importantly, develop. And it was so awesome when Hattie's research came through and this idea of collective efficacy started to gain momentum, because it gave language to what we had experienced of, oh my goodness, as a school, this is what that thing was that we were feeling, that we feel we're making a collective impact, and we had evidence knowing of what that was. The development of the collective efficacy within that school just started to escalate. And then, like I said, created this momentum for other schools starting to reach out and wanting to learn. And then all of a sudden, we'd have, as we were reflected and tried to explain the complexities of how all these different pieces were fitting together within the school, we'd have a high school saying, oh, well, that actually could, the framework could fit for what we're doing. And all of a sudden there'd be outreach schools that would say, we're starting to use that framework. It took on a bit of a life of its own. And it's been through working with those schools and jurisdictions that our understanding of collaborative response is deepened substantially. It's really about how do we collaboratively respond to the needs of the students. But where it differs from some of the more traditional tiered systems of supports is we're doing it in a way that responds to the needs of students, but is building everybody's capacity in a very intentional way over and over again, where the collective capacity and growth of our team is intensifying, which then is going to have cascading effects for impacting more and more students in a positive way. Sorry, that was a kind of a big level picture of
That's
our
awesome.
collaborative response, which when we go to implement within schools has some very intentional structures and processes embedded within it.
And there's two really important things I'm pulling out from that story. And the first one is Claire's home is so close to Nanton, and they have the best candy store.
They do. In
And
fact, our daughter is married to the son of the owners of that. So we often like to joke that we married into the Nanton candy store fortune. So we have
No
that connection as well.
There you go. That's incredible. But the second point is maybe a bit more on theme to what we're getting at here. And it's what you actually alluded to, Hottie's work on collective efficacy, and specifically his work on collective teacher efficacy.
Yes.
And for those that might not know what this refers to, it's when you have a group that believe in what you're doing.
Yes.
You have alignment, there's cohesiveness through a team, where whether you're a multi-grade classroom school, whether you're a school that's trying to run a farm, whether you're a school that has a high-end sports team or trying to get into esport or anything for that matter, every single person in your building is buying in, talking positively and thinking positively about that, and you'll see exponential growth in your program. My first actionable question for you is how can leaders get to a place where they start to establish this collective efficacy?
Yeah. So I think the starting place is, and I believe in start simple and build complexity as you go. I was really drawn to an episode that you did with Kevin, the dubbed Prairie Principal, where he said, yeah, in our school right now in Ontario, we have all of these things that are happening, but we didn't start there. We started with a garden. That was the first thing we did. And that really stuck with me from that episode that you had with him. And so I think from a leadership standpoint, it's starting with meeting structures. How do we create opportunities for people to collaborate? It's one thing to say, we believe we should collaborate. And in our school, every teacher would have said, oh yeah, we collaborate all the time, until we really understood that no, we're collegial, we're helping and we're supporting, but collaboration looks different than just getting along. It's asking each other hard questions, pushing and challenging one another. And that's hard to do without structures. So we often talk about, let's look at the collaborative structures, i.e., the meetings that we have in our building, because you can't collaborate without meetings. Whenever anyone says, I wish we wouldn't have meetings anymore, I push back on that, because what you're saying is you wish we wouldn't have ineffective meetings. You have to have meetings if you're going to collaborate. And I believe we have to collaborate in this profession, because it is far too complex for any one person to engage in it on their own. So being able to think about, what are the collaborative structures that I have within the building, and then being really intentional with some of the processes that happen. So we often talk about, do you have norms in place? And when a school goes, no, we all get along, we don't need norms. No, you need norms. We need to clearly articulate how we expect to interact with one another. When we come into the meetings, do we have a clear agenda? What is our purpose and focus? Do we have roles that we'll take? I'll be facilitating. You'll be taking notes. This person's going to be our timekeeper. Like, those are real simple things that we start to get started. And then within collaborative response, we talk about introducing this particular meeting structure that we call the collaborative team meeting. That is very different way of talking about students, and love to break that down for you if that's possible, Tyler.
I'm ready.
Okay. So the collaborative, and again, this is one component within a greater overall framework, and the other parts of the framework start influencing and are influenced by the collaborative team meeting, but it really is, we refer to it as the heartbeat of the whole framework. So this is what it looks like. We ask that you, Tyler, come ready with a student and what's a key issue that you're experiencing right now. And when you say, I'd like to talk about Kurtis, and let me tell you everything I've done and what I know, we frame back and say, no, just what's a key issue. And so you might say, right now, the key issue that I'm experiencing for Kurtis is heightened anxiety when it comes to written assignments. I know that he can do it, but he gets so overwhelmed with trying to produce a piece of writing that he has difficulty getting started. Okay, so heightened anxiety when completing written assignments. There's our key issue. Now, we take all the attention off Tyler, the teacher, by saying to others in the room, who else has a student? No story, just a name of someone who is also experiencing that. And when one teacher says, you can add Tanisha to that, and another one says, yeah, Simon is that too. What we're doing in this is we're trying to get the attention off the student, the individual student, and onto the, so what should we do when a student has heightened anxiety? And by other people suggesting names, it becomes our issue, not Tyler's issue. We're not sitting in that room and saying, Tyler, you should. We just start saying, what could we do? And it opens up this beautiful brainstorm that in time can be informed by the continuum of supports that we're going to develop in time. But we start brainstorming. One of the things I do in my classroom is I chunk the assignment. I make it really clear of what step 1, step 2, step 3. Someone else jumps in and says, when I do that, I actually highlight, and then I do check-ins that when you've done step 1, do that. And when someone else says, what if we had the student just take a brain break after they've done step 1 before they go to step 2? We just brainstorm. And then we want to come back and say, all right, Tyler, from this conversation, we've listed a whole bunch of ideas. What's one thing that you're going to try for the student that you brought forward? And when you say, I think I'm going to try that idea of chunking. I've done something like that, but not to the same degree. Put me down for that commitment. And I'm going to try that for Tressa. Then we turn to, okay, this other person brought up Tanisha. What's one thing you want to try? And it's through this that we're getting not only solutions focused in our thinking, but action oriented. And what we see over time is people start stretching. We hear things like, I'm going to try Kurtis's idea, but I'm going to need help. I'm not quite sure what that looks like, which doesn't happen right away. It doesn't happen naturally. It's through creating high degrees of psychological safety and vulnerability. But we often say in that collaborative team meeting, every person in the room is an expert, but every person is a learner. Everyone can take something away. And it's through that one meeting structure that we start building out some of the other elements and the underlying collaborative culture that we're trying to build. So I know that was a bit of a lengthy explanation, but that meeting structure, it looks like we're talking about kids, but we're really not. We're using the kid to leverage a conversation about pedagogy, about practice.
And what you actually do is you establish a sense of ownership over the problem.
100%.
Right. And because if I sit here and share my student's problem, everybody else looks at that and says, oh, that's his problem. Good luck with it. Here's what we can do to help. Good luck. And we didn't really collaborate. You just shared your resources and your tips and tricks. And we walked out of there.
Yeah. Or
thinking, I'm going to maybe use one of these.
Yeah. Or right? Even worse, it reaches a point of, Tyler, maybe you should try this. Oh, no, I tried that. It doesn't work. Well, here's an idea. No, I don't think that would work for this student. All of a sudden, the conversation is going to shut down because you're not open, because we've made it.
You start rejecting. Yeah. And people don't like
it.
And
we've made it your issue rather than this is something that we collectively experience. What could we do? It helps to reinforce that idea that all of us have issues that we are encountering. How can we solve them together? And it then doesn't boil down to you've brought Kurtis, the student, to the conversation, and now let's pile on everything that's wrong with this kid, with the parent engagement, with we really should get this student referred because I'm sure there's a diagnosis that we need to look at. It that turns it all to external and things out of it actually limits collective efficacy for us.
Yeah. And the ownership aspect of it, rooting back to the element and the value of earth. What is your expected outcome? What are you hoping from this? And whatever they say their outcome is, you can pose that question back. Who else has that same expected outcome? Yeah. It's about the growth of the kid. It's about progressing them for a year's worth of progress, for a year's worth of input. I think that's Hattie again that comes out and says that. And you're going to get every teacher in the room that says, well, that's my end goal too. That's what we're all just trying to do. And now you've established your collective efficacy in the mindset of we're here together to do and solve the same things. Hey, we're in a world of growing technology. I'm going to throw something out there too, because you mentioned something powerful about the steps of breaking things down. I just worked with a teacher today who said, I need help on breaking this down step by step. And I said, throw it into Chat GPT and ask it to break it down by step and see what it comes up with, because it's going to do some really incredible things. So we also need to be willing to collaborate with our artificial intelligence around us as well in the growing technology world.
So now I'm going to use that specific example to show the power of this collaborative team meeting as part of our overall collaborative response. You're in a meeting and you're in a one-on-one conversation with a teacher and you've suggested this potential as an idea. They try it and, oh my goodness, I had no idea Chat GPT could do that. Now, the next time we're in a collaborative team meeting and I have an issue that comes up. Now, this teacher is saying, one of the things I've tried recently is this. We start growing everyone's expertise. And again, it's that idea that everyone has something to contribute. And it doesn't matter if you're a 30-year vet or in your first year of teaching, we can all learn through this process. And it was exactly what happened in our school. Of a person down the hall who had expertise in this one area had a mechanism to be able to share and learn. And then the informal collaboration that happened outside of these highly formalized meeting structures became super apparent, because in the meeting, you mentioned this one idea. I'm popping out after to have a conversation with you because I'd like to see what that looks like. I need some help.
Absolutely. And what we're doing here is we're unpacking those layers of the team and we're establishing how collaboration works. But now we can take this with data and evidence and start to assess, okay, now where is our problem? Where is the issue? How can we start to address it? So, what are ways that leaders can be interpreting and responding to data and evidence to try to find what they need to address?
Yeah. So I'll share with you, we have a free webinar that shares ways that leaders can organize data. Because I think the first thing that we need to say before we say, how do we help teachers unpack and utilize our data? The question comes back to us as leaders of how have you organized that data? I think it's unfair to say we're going to use data, but then we dump raw data in front of teachers and expect them to have the time to decipher it when we know how critical time is. So I often share when we're working through the data and evidence piece with leaders of how have you color coded that data? Color coding becomes super, super important where let's say we're using something as simple as a numeracy screen that we're utilizing with all of our students. And it shows through these 10 subdomains of the screener a score that comes out of where's the student at. Let's start color coding that. Red is students that are not yet meeting our expectation. Yellow is those that are approaching, they're close. Green is meeting expectation and blue is exceeding. Once we start color coding, now we can help for people to see patterns, to really quickly access what are the areas that we need to look at. And then this also helps our collaborative team meeting in time, because instead of saying, Tyler, who's a student that you've brought and what's a key issue? We can say, Tyler, who's a student that in the data is yellow and what is a key issue that you saw within the data? And we often talk about that simple color organizing structure is in our collaborative team meetings, we're not going to focus on red. We're going to focus on yellow, ones who are close. And it may just take an adjustment in our classroom pedagogy to see success. And the iron or the paradox here in thinking is that by trying some strategies for students who are close, my toolbox is building, which is going to benefit every student, as particularly those that are our highest needs, our highest concerns. And this is where the layers of team become so important, that in the collaborative team meeting, we're addressing students that might not have naturally come up because they're close when we went and color coded that data. But we do have layers where, yeah, Kurtis, the data says is red, but we have another layer where we are talking in depth about his plan, the supports that he has in place, what we're doing for this. So I go back to utilizing data and evidence effectively starts with how we've organized it for analysis.
And questioning if the data you found aligns with what your value was. Is it reflective of what you're trying to achieve?
100%.
And one of my favorite pieces of data to analyze is actually trends. And trend data really only means something if there's been consistency. You're not manipulating a variable a ton. And so a good example that I'll use is if I'm looking at literacy results from screening tests in Division 1 elementary, if it's the same teacher for the last 5 years, I should be looking at where the trend is going in the last 5 years. Are we trending down in results, up in results? Where are we going? And then start unpacking why, right? It's not about individual kids. It's not about groups. If we have a downward trend in literacy development, you remove the kids from that because you're no longer working with one kid in one grade at 1 year. You're working with over the span of 5 years. This is what's happening.
Yeah.
And you look at the trend and the result of that. And so I love to analyze that. And that, I guess that's a way to break the barrier of how do you shift a mindset and with that implementing the water element, how do you break that barrier of looking at just the kid? To me, it's the trend when you look at it at a larger scale. That really only works when you have the consistency though.
It is. And I think the other thing that happens through that is the data is not judging or evaluating, it's informing a conversation. So it became really valuable as a leader to be able to say, I'm not questioning the practice that is happening, but here's what we're seeing in the trend. What does that mean for us? What do you see? How could we impact that? What we're doing obviously right now isn't working, or else we wouldn't see the trend going the way it is. So we have to start thinking about a different approach.
And collaborative responses.
Oh, yeah.
And we sit here and we talk about how awesome they are and how they bolster collective efficacy. And yet at the end of the day, it's not something that I can walk into a school with 30 staff and instantly say, hey, we are all going to be collaborative and have collective efficacy and off into the sunset
Not at all.
together. What are some of the most common challenges in schools reaching out trying to get there?
I think exactly what you're saying is, how do I get everyone on board? And I think it goes back to some of our learning that we've done around change theory of your expectation of getting everyone on board. Don't start there. Where's our critical mass? Let's pilot with a group to start learning some of these structures and processes. Let's start with a critical mass and let it grow over time. I really love Fullen's idea of behaviors over beliefs. As a leader, I may not be able to influence beliefs initially, but I can certainly influence behaviors. I can say we are going to meet in teams that happen every professional learning day. Here's the structures that we're going to be putting into place. We're going to adjust and change as we learn through it, but I can put in place that behavior. And it's through that we can see belief shift. And I saw this as a leader myself of, someone who came into some of our early iterations of meetings with arms folded. Why am I here? I give me this 30 minutes back in my classroom. I could make more value of it. Where in a year's time, were some of the people leading this because they felt, oh my goodness, I did not see the value in what we were doing. I now get it. And they would have never got there if we tried to focus on changing beliefs. It was through shifting behavior. So that would be my first thing, is to think about what are the structures.
That was actually the key right there, though. You just made a statement, changing beliefs. That's their earth. You had to show them their earth before you could you had to get ready before you could fire.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to that. You had to show them that earth.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the first things is I have a colleague who says, stop trying to get buy-in, just get momentum. That's what you want. And not everyone's going to be on board initially. Work with those that are, and then build that momentum for us. So I think that's one. I think sometimes there's a lack of understanding, especially when it comes to collaborative response work that I do around the big picture. Sometimes we go, oh yeah, we do a collaborative response already, but they haven't really investigated what does this mean? What is the big picture? Or even worse, go, oh, okay, we'll just rename some of the things we already do. And yeah, now we're doing that without having really shifted or changed anything. So I think, again, it goes to that ready phase of understanding and thinking about the big picture. And then I think it's being able to, through the structures and processes, starting small. And we're going to, for our next set of meetings, we're going to establish norms, and we're going to start there as a starting place for us. And then obviously, one of the first roadblocks that always comes in around collaborative response is time. And how do we find the time to do this? And I've worked with a lot of schools around looking at innovative ways to timetable. We now have divisions who intentionally put in place things like regular early dismissals in order for this collaborative work to happen, because they see the value and the impact.
I'm going to put this out there too. Better staff meetings have better PL days.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we often hear from people in this work, this conversation used to take us 90 minutes. It now takes us 30 because we're focused, we're efficient, and we have structures that we work within rather than have no.
And it's not that people, yeah. And it's not that people want less meetings. It's that if it can be said in an email, they want it in an
100%.
email. They don't want to be told it in person. And then you free up a world of time towards these meetings where you can actually sit down and have meaningful conversation.
Absolutely.
This is an unpopular opinion for teachers, but this is something that I do at the end of years where, and it's rooted in that change is the only constant. Change is always going to happen. It's unavoidable. And I love approaching the end of every year when we start to plan next year to say, you have an opportunity to, and pretend that you, even though you're coming back to the same school, the same building, it's a brand new school. You get to pick your role, you get to pick what you do, you get to pick its mission, you get to pick its vision, you get to set its values. And every single year, we take time to say, what does that look like for us? And if it's different than what it was right now, then why are we not shifting to that?
Yeah. I love that. That's
Right.
fantastic, Tyler.
Yeah. Hey, we are getting too close to the end here. I have a couple more questions for you, and I feel like we just need to do episode after episode. So I'm sure we'll have a part 2 at some point here. What are you hoping that people listening start to action in their lives tomorrow from this?
I would say there's two things. One, it's if we're speaking primarily to those that are leading learning within their schools, it's thinking really intentionally about how do we structure the time when people are together. I was recently with a school of that, or a school that had said, we don't want to micromanage that time that people have. They're professionals. And I agree with that 100%. And there's a but we still want to put structures and parameters around that. I once had Jay McTighe share in a session that as leaders, your job is to set the banks of the river, but then don't try and micromanage the flow of the water. But if you don't set the banks, that water is going to flow everywhere. It's going to meander. It's going to lose its power as it fuses out if there's no banks to that river. So that would be my first thing, is thinking about how do we structure. And again, if people are interested, our website has a number of resources to help in that area of how do you structure the time that we have together. And my second piece that I would say starting tomorrow is how do we start to shift our conversations around students to being about, okay, yeah, what we're experiencing right now, that's a challenge or that's an issue. What could we do about it? What could we do about it? And it doesn't mean that we need to seek out a magic solution. There likely isn't one, but we should always have a next step. What's the next step we're going to try? And through trying, again, that's a ready, fire, aim. What we try might not work, but we'll learn something from it that'll help inform the next step that we'll take.
Kurtis, I can tell you're in education because I asked for one thing they could action and you gave me 2. So there we go.
Of course.
Hey, you alluded to contact information. If people want to hear more from you, your story, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
I would say our website, jigsaw.ca, is the best place to go to. My contact information is there. We have a large number of resources, and then we do have lots of online learning opportunities as well to be able to engage. I think that's the starting place. We also have all of our social media and that, and we have a podcast, or a couple podcasts as well. And looking forward, Tyler, to you joining one of those, because I'd like to reverse this opportunity and have a chance to pick your brain from the other side of the microphone as well.
For sure. And what does your future look like, Kurtis?
I think is just continuing to learn. I'm so excited around the collaborative response work that we do because it affords me the opportunity to be in different systems, different schools, different organizations, which is just awesome, fertile ground to be learning, to be able to shift. The way we envision this work now is very different than what it looked like even 3 years ago. It's constantly shifting. So I think that's one part. And then the other is just, I come from a background of teachers. My mother was a lifelong kindergarten teacher. We have other teachers through different parts of my family. I believe that our teachers are critical to moving forward our society. And I just want to play a small role in how can we best leverage the incredible expertise that we have in our profession and continue to build upon the work that we do. We often see through this collaborative response work and through the connections and highly effective structures for collaboration, it's also about creating connections for teachers and supporting our well-being so that nobody has to do this job in isolation. We should all be part of a team that is working effectively. We say in this work, every child deserves a team. And I would argue every teacher does as well. So that's what the future for me is. How can I continue to help shift this profession to being one that is a collaborative endeavor, and no one should ever have to be feeling like they are isolated in their classroom, close their door, and do the best they can on their own.
Be careful, because your earth is showing right there, and being rooted in collaboration and wanting to do what's best for everybody around you. Last question here, and it's one of my favorite ones, but it's one of the harder ones. However, you wrote something that I'm excited to have you expand upon here. What advice would you give to anybody that's listening that is struggling with change?
Yeah, and I reflected on that question, and I think it comes back simply to seek out celebrations. Seek out, even when it feels like we're not making ground, we're not creating momentum, or when we're thinking about an individual student that we're just not seeing growth or the impact we'd like to see, there's always a celebration. And we often share through the team meeting structures. Every meeting should start with celebrations. And it's not just a Tyler he's now reading chapter books. Yay, that's great. But we want to be able,
for the record, I do read chapter books.
Nice. But we want to drill into going, that's great. What did we do that led to that success for Tyler? Because we're trying to return back to, again, can we evidence what we've done that's led to these small little celebrations? And I think focusing on the celebrations is so critically important for us. It should be a part of every conversation.
Kurtis, thank you so much for sharing Elemental Educator. I can't wait to join you and get to share my story and perspective. And I can't wait to have you back for round 2 when we get to see where this is going after that. Thanks again for all of your time.
I would love that, Tyler. Thank you as well for the opportunity to engage in a conversation.
You've been listening to the Elemental Educator. Our aim is to illuminate optimal educational practices on a global scale. And second, we want to shine a light on the expertise and knowledge that Tyler brings to educational institutions. He's not just a talking head. He's a practicing educator, a school principal, armed with a master's in educational administration, and on the brink of completing his doctorate. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Elemental Educator. And to contact us, fire off an email. See what I did there? Fire off. Okay. Send an email to elementaleducator@gmail.com. See you next time on the Elemental Educator.